A couple weeks ago, I had to attend work training 70 miles from home. That night, driving home, I drove through the worst road conditions I've ever experienced. The previous week's unmelted 7 inches of snow had blown across the highway. I was losing traction and slipping at just 25 miles per hour. I passed 2 accidents within 20 miles of town, and it took around 2.5 hours to get home. Within 30 minutes of getting home, I saw on the Department of Transportation website that they had shut down the highway. Here's a philosophical question. How should I think about this experience? Should I feel relieved at getting home safe and glad that I got onto the highway before it was shut down? Or should I prefer that they had shut down the highway earlier, made my own commute longer, and not had to drive on those conditions? Well, from my knowledge in the present day, having already got home safe that night, I might be tempted to feel happy they didn't shut down the highway earlier. I know now that I got home safe, and that shutting down the highway before I got on would have wasted up to an extra hour of my time on a detour. Taking the other perspective, that is to prefer that they'd shut down the highway before I got on, is to recognize the risk of crashing was itself a bad thing that should have been avoided. This can be difficult intuitively to accept as more correct, because I have the knowledge in the current day that I got home safe and didn't have to take a long time-consuming detour. However, this perspective has one critical advantage, which is the ability to make predictions about future events. Although I can look back and say, there was a 100% chance of me not crashing on that highway, because it literally didn't happen, I can't look into the future and say the same about the next situation or the next, the linear nature of time and such. So now that we've got that completely unrelated story out of the way, let's talk some more about Fukushima. We established in our last video that Fukushima was actually pretty bad. It wasn't a worst case scenario, but it was worse than we've been instructed to think. What lessons should we take from this event then? How should it inform our opinion about nuclear power? In 2013, TEPCO released a report in which they admitted the disaster was preventable, and they knew about the possibility of a tsunami the size of 2011's. The stated reason for them not having made the infrastructure improvements to the plant was that they were, ironically, worried it would hurt the safe image of Japanese nuclear power. How do we reconcile this fact? That simple human error in plant management, like being worried about public perception, can result in this. Not to mention how bad it could have been if it weren't for the truly heroic actions of plant workers. There's a great documentary about the response at the plants that has a number of testimonials from plant workers, TEPCO managers, and the Prime Minister during the disaster. I'll link to the documentary in the description, but I want to show the following few clips from it that I found absolutely remarkable.
TEPCO dispatches generator trucks, but they are slowed by earthquake and tsunami wreckage. When they finally arrive, late on the 11th, damage to the plant's electrical system makes it all but impossible to connect them. So they must improvise, hoping to jury-rig their dead instruments back to life by raiding the parking lots, grabbing as many batteries as they can from buses and cars.
It took several hours to figure out how to connect the batteries. They had the schematic wiring diagram, and they were furiously examining it for several hours. We ended up wasting a lot of time.
Meanwhile, the water is boiling away fast in Unit 1. But how fast? 6 hours after the tsunami at 9:19 p.m., they finally get the batteries and some portable generators rigged so the instruments can flicker on. The gauges show the water level in Reactor 1, normally 20 feet above the top of the uranium fuel, is now only 8 inches above it. They pencil in a running record of the water levels right beside the gauge. But the pressure in the vessel is so high it causes inaccurate instrument readings. They learn later the uranium fuel had actually been exposed for 3 hours.
It's becoming more like a lava flow from a volcano. So it overheated, melted, released the radioactive contents, and started falling into the bottom of the reactor vessel.
In Tokyo, Japan's Prime Minister, Naoto Kan, worries that he might have to order a mass evacuation from Fukushima all the way to Tokyo. 50 million people.
If Tokyo needed to be evacuated, I feared the entire nation of Japan would be paralyzed by chaos for quite a long time.
We knew we had to vent, but the question was how. There was no electricity, and the valve was pneumatic. We needed an air compressor to open it, but we didn't even have that.
TEPCO headquarters tells Superintendent Yoshida to stop while they seek government approval.
Yoshida does this very dramatic thing where on the video conference, he orders the people to stop the seawater injection. Before that, he called them over and said, I'm going to order you to stop the seawater injection. Ignore that. That's just for Tokyo. You continue seawater injections.
Personally, I think that the decision that Superintendent Yoshida made was the right one.
If we had stopped the seawater injection at that point, I think things would have been much worse.
Superintendent Yoshida quietly tells a few trusted workers to prepare buses for an evacuation. For now, he has no choice but to order his men back into harm's way.
After the explosion of Unit 3, he begged us to again go to the field to save Unit 2. It was very impressive.
There are more than 3,100 fuel bundles, millions of uranium pellets in the pools for Units 1 through 4. They are not inside the containment vessels, and there are no emergency pumps to keep them full. Should the pools go dry, the rods could overheat and catch fire in the open air, releasing a huge amount of radiation. This is the worst-case scenario that has haunted Prime Minister Kan. It could force him to order a mandatory evacuation of everyone for 150 miles or more. Tokyo, uninhabitable. Maybe for decades.
So that's how bad Fukushima fairly easily could have been. I asked earlier how to reconcile that something so banal as worry about public perception could cause something like this. That wasn't a rhetorical question. To me, it is irreconcilable. Fukushima demonstrated the raw scale of what could possibly go wrong, even in the 21st century. Look, it's easy to get caught up in the pretty good, relatively short history of nuclear power and say, hell yeah, full steam ahead. Global warming isn't going to solve itself. And I can't hardly blame anyone for having that position, given just how bad climate change will become in the next century. But if you are for that, you have to face the reality that more reactor accidents are going to happen, and they could be truly devastating. At least the last one happened in a country on good terms with the US, and we were able to rapidly provide assistance in managing the disaster. China currently has about 40 gigawatts of generation from nuclear power, and will likely at least double that over the next 10 years. Do they have the structure for plant management in place that would ensure an event like Fukushima can't happen? Well, I don't know. What if the next accident happens at Xiaomoishan or at Hongyanhe? Will China as readily accept aid from the US? Guess we'll cross that bridge when we need to? It shouldn't be forgotten that it took America its own partial nuclear meltdown to learn essential lessons on plant operator training and user interface design in current reactor plants. Is it going to take China its own meltdown or meltdowns to learn how to do it the right way? What will be the human toll? It's really difficult to speculate, but these are the questions that should be foremost in your mind if you're pro-global nuclear energy as a solution to climate change. All I really know is that when it comes to safety, it seems like humans generally only change their behavior once a whole lot of people die. Building codes in the US weren't really a thing until years after 146 people needlessly died in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911. an event personally witnessed by future Secretary of Labor Francis Perkins. A virtually identical incident would occur 82 years later in Bangkok and kill 188 people. We've more or less exported low safety standards to third world factories instead of first world, but at least America got safer, I guess. As far as America goes, I think the NRC does a pretty good job regulating. I've never worked there, but what I've read about their practices and inspections makes me reasonably confident. What unfortunately doesn't give me confidence is that American nuclear power is still run by profit-seeking private utilities. As we know, there's nothing quite like a profit motive to encourage less than stellar safety standards. Like I said before, I can hardly blame anyone for being pro-global nuclear, because we can already pretty certainly estimate the human toll of climate change, and that certainly looks grim. But accepting nuclear to avert global warming is a pretty treacherous deal, and that's without even touching on that pesky issue of nuclear weapon proliferation.